On this episode of the show, I have with me Peter Horidan. He is CEO at Vouch, and we're going to be talking about digital IDs and, well, how are they going to start changing things that we might not actually fully be aware of. And we'll dive into some examples that Peter will share with us, securing agentic, and how will digital IDs help us actually identify good, bad agents, rogue agents versus the ones we should be working with. And we'll talk a little bit about some of how we keep our data secure when we're dealing with LLMs and his thoughts around those areas. I'm sure everyone is now curious with all the usage out there. So Peter, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. All right. Before we start, why don't you tell everyone what Vouch does?
So Vouch helps identify people online to access life's most essential services, like opening a bank account, seeing a doctor, or anywhere that you need to prove who you are for certain online.
Awesome. All right. So I know that I've been long awaiting the day where I can leave. I leave most of my wallet behind sometimes by accident because it's now my phone does most of all that stuff. The one thing I have to have it for is my driver's license still.
Right.
That might be changing. And I guess when we talk about digital IDs, before we dive into the driver's license example, I guess let's define a digital ID, because some people might be thinking of various digital IDs, but when we're going to have this conversation, we're talking about digital IDs. What does that exactly mean?
So we are just on the edge of most people actually receiving a digital ID. So what it is the government, rather than issuing you the little piece of plastic that lives in your wallet for your whole life, that we've been carrying around all this time, instead it issues you a digital document that lives on your phone. And what happens is that document is issued into the cryptography system of the phone and only comes off the phone, or is only able to be used if you have a face print or a fingerprint, a live face print or fingerprint of yourself. So that gives us a ton of advantages. I think most people are starting to see these show up. California is issuing these. New York is issuing these. 7% of adults with a driver's license already now have a digital driver's license. But I think most people don't really know what it is. And the interesting thing is this is going to profoundly change many things that we do online in a way that makes us a lot more secure, reduces fraud, and is actually way more convenient.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. You mentioned, obviously, it lives in our wallet. There are times when we need to take that driver's license or ID out and hold it up to either our phone or camera on your laptop to validate and authenticate yourself for a variety of services, which seems very arcane given how modern everything is. I mean, when we're talking about that step alone and removing that friction, what kind of services, if we remove that friction, what kind of services are potentially opened up to us?
Yeah, it seems crazy, doesn't it? It's 2025, and here we are, holding this plastic card up to a camera. And let's just be honest about it. It's a lot of people try to modify that card, maybe by putting a different picture, taping a different picture on the front and holding that up, or changing some of the data. And Vouch specializes in this. A lot of other companies do as well. There's a lot of work you have to do to try to spot fakes and verify with databases and everything else, so that when you're opening a bank account, seeing your doctor, we've done a terrific job of proving the person is who they say they are. But digital IDs make it just so much more simpler and foolproof. So the way that a digital ID works is when the government issues you your ID, they take all of that information, including your face, including your picture. They then sign it as the government so that no one else can sign it. And then they put it on your phone. And then when it comes time to want to identify yourself, let's say like in this browser app that we're using right now, the browser could just ask me, do you want to provide your digital driver's license to the person on the other end of the browser? You'd say yes. Your phone comes alive. You have to have a live face print or a live fingerprint. It will not do it without it. And then your phone goes ahead and signs a version of your driver's licenses that goes off and says, this is who the government says it is. And what's interesting is there's a lot of new capabilities here too, because you can actually choose what you want to send. You can send just your name, just your address. You can actually send just your age, or you can send just that you're over a certain age. And this is going to unlock a whole new set of applications that just aren't possible today.
Well, it's interesting. Sometimes when you do this, take a picture to authenticate and verify, and there's companies that require you to do that because there's limitations. You're sharing everything, because you just said you can share specific parts of that. And When you think about the ecosystem that we're in, where everyone is very worried about sharing information, heck, we don't want our devices listening to us. We're all worried about that. When it comes to this little ID, and somebody says, I need, we're front and center with it. There's no thought about, hey, any of that information might be superfluous, or some of that information they don't need. We're just like, hey, here it is, because we're so trained. When you're talking about, you can control parts of that, and I guess we're talking about our security, and we'll loop in, the modern world in a second. But that control, that granularity, when it talks to our we're referring to our personal security at this point of information. When we're sharing that and we have that control, does that change how we're going to interact with different services? Because sometimes somebody does ask you something, you're like, I'm just not going to do it. Like it's not worth it for me. I don't know what's happening behind the scenes there.
Yeah, and it's funny. Humans are funny. We're pretty conflicted about that, because on the one hand, let's say you're at a baseball game and you're a little bit thirsty and you want a beer, and you go to the beer stand and they say, I need to see your ID. Most people just hand over their ID and don't even think about it. Even though you've just shared all your PII with a complete stranger, that person could be wearing AI glasses, take a photo of your ID, and now they have all of your information. Yet when we're sharing it online, people are a lot more reluctant. And to your point, it just feels strange. You're saying, well, I'd like to open a new bank account. And they're like, okay, take out your ID and hold it up to the camera. It's not something people's used to. And there is an abandonment right there. People say, I'd rather just not. And we had vouched, and other companies who are in this business do a lot of work to try to reduce those abandonment rates, to try to make it as easy as possible. Nevertheless, it's still unusual. But providing a digital ID is way easier. And in fact, I would point out that it's a lot easier than some of the sort of substitutes that we use today for ID. Let me give you an example, if I could. So when you change your password online, usually there's some sort of second factor involved in changing that password. So they might say, oh, I'm going to send 6 digits to your cell phone or to your email. If you get the 6 digits, we'll go do the password reset. Or a lot of times in banking, they'll do a credit report lookup. So they might say, hey, we need to identify you. Here's 4 addresses. Which one of these addresses did you live in the past? And you pick one. And you go through 2 or 3 of those. Or even, if they're just trying to prove you're a human, you might get the old, here's 9 pictures, circle of fire hydrants. Well, why do we do that? Why don't we just say, show me your ID? And, in the real world, in the physical world, we would just say, show me your ID. And an example is changing your hotel room key. So that's kind of like a password reset for your hotel room. Like, let's say you're out of your hotel room, you lose the key, you don't know where it is, you go to the front desk and you say, I need a new key. That's effectively a password reset for your hotel room, right? So what do? Do they say, no problem, we're going to send you 9 digits to your cell phone number, and if you tell me the 9 digits, we'll give you a new key? No. Do they say, here's 4 addresses, pick the right one, and we'll give you a new key? They don't do that. And they definitely don't say, here's 9 pictures, if you can circle all the crosswalks, you'll get your key. What do? They just say, show me your ID. And you don't think anything of it, you show your ID. And another example is high-value retail. So let's say you're just buying a laptop at a big box store, an in-person store. When you get to the front desk, you show your credit card, you're ready to check out. Probably they're going to say, I need to see a photo ID. Now, what's interesting about that is seeing the photo ID is very low value because it is very cheap and easy. You can order them online to get a fake physical ID where you can take your picture and anyone else's information, and you'll get it in about a week and a half, and is relatively cheap, and you can use that to go buy all the laptops you want. So that check is very low value that they're doing in person, but it's sort of high inconvenience, right? Why am I having to pull out my ID? Well, when we do it online, now for the first time, you'll be able to share your ID in a way that's much more convenient than going and digging 6 digits out of your email or going and picking an address or any of this other stuff. You'll say, we'd like to change my password. The browser would say, I need to see your ID, please. Can you share your digital ID? You click yes. You choose what you want to share. Your phone comes alive. You put your thumb or your face print on there, and then it's done. And it's much more secure because now we're absolutely positive that you are who you say you are. There's no way to tamper with the ID once it's been shipped by the state. And you must have that live biometric to prove you're the one the ID was issued to. So I predict that within 10 years, every password reset, for any service that matters, I'm sure there'll be toy services that don't really care about this, but for any service where we care about who the user is, you're going to be required to show a digital ID in order to change it. And that will completely eliminate phishing fraud. The number one type of fraud, even today, even in 2025, is phishing fraud, where you get an email, looks legitimate. It says, hey, you need to change your password. You go to this site, it looks real and official. You enter your old password, enter your new one. And guess what? The hackers own your account because you just gave them your credentials. That form of fraud will be completely eliminated.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I guess some of these examples you're talking about, how freely we share our IDs. Now everyone's going to be thinking twice about popping this ID out to people. I guess when we're talking about online and so much infrastructure has been.
People,
go ahead.
People think they're sharing your digital ID, that there's some kind of phone home, that the government will be notified. Oh, Peter was on this site or doing these activities when he used this ID. That's not the case. So the W3C and other standards bodies have been very wise when they set these standards up. And phoning home is actually prohibited. Your phone has everything it needs to do to use a digital ID to basically sign an attestation that you are who you say you are without going back to the state and reporting that your digital ID was used. So a lot of people are concerned, and for good reason, about government tracking. The government tracking is not a part of these systems.
Absolutely. I guess as we've all been online. There's infrastructures, as you kind of alluded to making sure we're safe, making purchases, opening all these, all that's been discussed, and there's so much history to it.
Yeah.
I guess as we're moving into the new way of agents trying to do things on our behalf, this is, I guess, a little bit of complication for a lot of people because we've never really thought about somebody else actioning on our behalf. And when we're talking about digital IDs, so far we've been talking about my ID, your ID, but when it comes to these agents out there, I guess there would have seemed to be a lot of room to potentially have bad actors misrepresent who they are, and try to be intermediary in that agent process. I guess how do digital IDs and agentic, how do they fit together? Where do they work together?
Yeah, so you bring up a great. So this development is both amazing and terrifying at the same time. So if for listeners, if you haven't tried it yet, go to ChatGPT, click agent mode, and then say something like, please go use my account at OpenTable to reserve a table at a certain restaurant on Friday at noon. And what'll happen is it'll open a browser window right there inside of your browser window. It's a little strange thing to see. You watch it navigate around to the OpenTable website. It then goes and finds a login button, gets you to where you have to enter your username and password, and says, okay, please enter your username and password so that I can be logged into OpenTable, and then I'll go book this table for you. You do that. Usually you get a second factor. Your phone beeps with another 6 digits. You go type the 6 digits in, and then it says, oh, looks like you're logged in. Don't worry, I will take it from here. And you can sit and watch as it does this amazing thing. It sits and navigates the UI, finds the time, finds a restaurant you wanted, finds the time you wanted, sees if it's available, and actually books the table. And then, within a few minutes, you get a real live text on your cell phone saying your table's ready. We can't wait to see you, on Friday. It's completely amazing. Now, on the one hand, this is awesome because there's so much drudge work in life. And if these software agents can do this for us, that would be amazing. ChatGPT and tools like it, really all the major LLM vendors are now have a feature like this. They're great at planning things or analyzing things. For example, you might say, I'd like to take a vacation this weekend. Could you please find me a beach and a restaurant and a flight and get me there? And it'll say, sure, here's your vacation plan. This is where you're going. Here's the flight to take. Here's where to stay, and so on. But now it's up to you to call the airline, to rent the car, to call the hotel, and everything else. Now with agent mode, what you can do is say, well, you do that. Here's my password to the airline. Here's my password to the hotel site. Here's my password to the rental car. You do the rest, and you do all that drudge work for me. And it's like everyone has their own personal administrative assistant. It's going to make our lives a lot easier. So it's really awesome, and I love using it. Here's the problem, though. For the service provider, in other words, for the airline or for the hotel or whoever, there's no distinction between what the agent is doing and what the human is doing. The agent is, in fact, showing up with the human's username and password and just acting as if you're the human's account and going and doing things. And so, as you pointed out, we may trust OpenAI and ChatGPT. I'm sure they have good intentions. But what about the next 1,000 agent vendors who don't, who create scam agent, where people have been groomed really by this new experience to say, oh yeah, we've trained everybody for the last several decades. Do not give your username and password to any third party, right? Do not let anybody know your username and password other than the site that gave it to you. And now we're teaching everybody, actually, it's fine for your AI agent to see all of your usernames and passwords and log in and pretend to be you. Now listen, none of the covers, there's a few more safeguards in that, but most people aren't aware of that. And most people are now primed to say, oh, sure, an agent asked for my username and password. I'll just enter it and it'll go do good things for me. Well, what happens when scam agent gets the username and password to your bank account or to your work account or whatever and goes in and, like, let's say you work in sales and you want to be better at sales. And so you give an agent access to your internal sales system. It can see all of your leads. It can see your closes. It can see your financial results before you report them. There's a lot of damage that could be done here. So we need a better way. We need a better way where it's simply not tenable that there's going to be no distance between the agent and the human doing things where you can't tell. And it's funny because in a lot of ways we saw this movie already in banking. In the earliest days of online banking in the late 90s and the early 2000s, the internet was new. Banks and brokerages had just put up their websites where you could see your balance, see your transactions. That was a new thing. People would want to download those into their financial management apps like Quicken or QuickBooks. And there's really no established way to do it in those days. And so companies came along that would just go screen scrape the bank for you. And there's companies like Yodlee and several others where you could give them your username and password to your bank. They'd log into the bank as you. They'd screen scrape all the information and they'd give it to you in a file. And this was a pretty big business for a while. And then banks suddenly woke up one day and said, hey, wait a minute. These companies have the username and passwords of millions of our users. You can use that username and password to transfer funds, to make external transfers. This can't continue. And so we came up with the OAuth 2.0 standard, and it's many people have used it today. If you've seen Plaid or a similar experience, where if you're in a budgeting tool or an accounting tool, if you want to connect to your bank, you go to the bank, and there's a link from the budgeting tool to the bank where you go to your bank site. The URL is the bank's URL on top. And the bank says, this budgeting tool, this accounting tool, wants to access your bank account. Will you allow it? And you can say yes or no. And there's a couple things about that are pretty distinct. The first is it's audited. In other words, we know explicitly when you granted this permission, and we can see that you did it on purpose. Number two, it's fine-grained. You can say yes to checking, no to savings, or you can say yes to balances, but no to transfers. You can kind of control what the thing can do. And then the third thing is it's revocable. You can go back to your bank later without the budgeting tool's permission and tell the bank, hey, turn that thing off. I don't trust it anymore. Well, we need the same thing for agents. And so what we need to do is create a world where if an agent wants to do something on your behalf, it goes to the service provider, meaning the airline or the hotel or the car rental company or the sales system or whatever it is, and says, I'm an AI. This human would like to use me to do stuff on you. What page should I send the human to authorize that? Then that service provider sends a link back to the AI. The AI says, the human, click this and go to that service provider and tell me. So now you click it. Now you're on the site of the service provider, like the airline, let's say. And the airline will say, oh, it looks like this AI would like to do stuff on your account. Will you allow it? And by the way, what do you want to allow? You might say, you can see my itinerary. You can book a ticket, but you cannot gift my frequent flyer miles. I don't want you to be able to do that. So you can choose what it should do. You click OK. You then go back to your agent. You say you should have access now. It checks. It says, yep, I have access. We're ready to go. This is different in a way that makes all of the difference, because now the AI shows up separately as its own identity and says, here I am this AI. I'd like to work for Peter. And Peter has now authorized me to do these things, and here I am to go do those things. So first of all, it's a much more manageable system. Second of all, I haven't given my username and password to any third parties. Third, it's auditable, revocable, and fine-grained what permissions I've given to this AI. And then fourth, we can tell the difference between what the AI did and what the human did. And this is very important for reputation, because AIs are going to have a reputation. In the early days of email in the 60s, when we created email, I wasn't around then, but when everyone was wearing Birkenstocks and sitting in their garage, nobody thought there'd be anything bad. We're an altruistic group, right? So anyone can send an email for free. Well, as a result, we have this massive spam industry. Still, 60 years later, the number one source of fraud, we talked about this earlier, is phishing email, sending a bad spam email. That's because they never really thought, oh, we were going to have to tell apart bad email senders from good email senders. So we have all these sort of bolt-on systems, and spam is still a huge problem today. So we need a way to tell the good agents apart from the bad agents. And that's going to happen through a community reputation system where agents have an identity. Whenever the agent logs into some service provider, the service provider reports back to a ratings bureau that says, this agent performed well, it seemed to act in the best interest of the human, it followed all the rules, or this agent acted poorly. I discovered 6 fraud orders that this agent placed, or whatever. And pretty quickly, that agent will be known as a fraud agent. And then everyone can just turn it off. Say, I'm sorry, we won't work with you at all because your reputation is too poor. So we need to invent all this infrastructure, and we're making a lot of progress. Vouch, we shipped our solution, which is called MCPI, or Model Context Protocol Identity, in May of this year. It's been reviewed by all the standards bodies. Several major companies are already implementing it. We have a lot of customers and a lot of interest, but that's the way it's got to go. We cannot have agents pretending to be people.
And that's fantastic. And understanding that, I think, puts a lot of things in context. When we're looking at agents, and I don't know to what degree this is happening, because maybe I haven't heard of it. I mean, you're in the industry, so you might have heard differently. Have there been circumstances yet where we've seen agents dealing with other agents and trying to find out about liability and accountability and all those things? It seems like a ripe area where if more than one agent's involved, it will be difficult to determine fault, and then accountability, and then illegal, and then this whole thing that could unfold. I mean, are we there yet, or are we still at such an early stage where we're just still trying to, crawl to walk before we run?
No, it's a great question. There's a lot of places where regulation hasn't really caught up yet with how quickly agents are moving. I'll give you a great example. I think a lot of us probably talk to our chatbots in the same way we might talk to a lawyer or a doctor or a therapist. You're trying to get a legal question answered. You share some personal details about a legal case that maybe is facing you. And you have sort of a conversation you might have with a lawyer. Same thing with a doctor. My arm hurts when I do this, and you tell it some medical details, and then you try to sort of self-diagnose, or at least diagnose through your chat agent. And if we were to do that with a human professional, with a human lawyer or a human doctor, all of those conversations would be privileged and would not be discoverable, and there's a strong expectation of confidentiality there. But the same is absolutely not true when you're talking to a chatbot. If you're talking to a chatbot and it's entirely about, you're treating it like a lawyer and it's a conversation about a legal case, there's zero protection for that. And in fact, the New York Times currently has an open subpoena against OpenAI where the judge has ordered OpenAI to preserve all chats. That means your chats, my chats, every chat, whether it has confidential information, private information, legal, medical, anything, they're all being preserved for possible discovery in the New York Times lawsuit. And so what does that mean? Well, that means even if you're not involved in any legal problems, the fact that your chat, the person running your AI agent gets involved in a legal case, they may have to provide your chats. And I think there's a lot of stuff that we've all shared. We've all become very close to our AI agents. I think there's a lot of stuff people have shared that you don't want being public. And so that's a really good case where the regulation hasn't caught up. And so you talked about liability and you talked about how this works together. I think we have a long way to go when you have an AI agent working on your behalf of like, what are the rules around that? I'll give you a perfect example. Let's go back to we're buying that plane ticket. When you buy a plane ticket as a human on a website, as a regular person logging in, not an agent, at some point there's a checkout page and you've picked your flight and you're ready to go and you've entered your credit card and there's a checkbox on the bottom. It says, I agree to the terms and conditions of this ticket. Well, try buying the plane ticket without checking that box. There's no way to do it. It does not matter how much money you're willing to shove over the counter for your plane ticket. You cannot buy the ticket without checking the box. That means somebody at that airline has decided it is more important for us to get this legal agreement in place than it is to sell even the most expensive ticket we can sell. Well, they do that for good reason. That's called a contract of carriage. It limits the airline's liability in the case of a late flight, lost luggage, or a crash, heaven forbid. So the airline really needs to have those protections in place, or they've decided we're not selling you a ticket. Well, what happens when your AI agent buys a ticket for you? It's just going to check the box. Like, well, it seems like I need to check the box so I can get past this page and move on. But there's no legal agreement now. An AI agent, at least in today's rules, cannot make any legal agreement for you. So what are we going to do about that? And it's a good example of where the regulation needs to catch up to the way people are using these things. There's going to be an unhappy moment where the lawyers behind these sites who said you can't proceed without clicking the terms and conditions thing are going to realize that we just did hundreds, thousands, millions of transactions without that thing being checked. And where do we stand now?
I love this discussion. And the fact that we treat whatever chat engine that you're using as a very close, I don't know, term. We confidant,
right?
Friend. I mean, it could be anything somebody wants to use it, whatever phrase we want to apply it. It is interesting because if they're holding on to these chats, I'm not sure if you go to Google, people will search in incognito to be aware of it. But these chat agents, it's like, I know people that use them for various different personal reasons, and you're like, okay, well, now if this is all being kept and potentially there's browsers being built off this data and we have agents that want to behave and they're learning about us, you start wondering, at what point did the agents start learning enough? And do we start understanding that I need specific levels of identification and verification for every little step, and which parts do I want to be left out of? Because obviously they're learning. I mean, it seems like, certainly seems like we're early days.
Yeah. I mean, listen, the judge was very clear. Even deleted chats need to be preserved.
Wow.
Now, and it was over a certain time period, but even chats that are in, in private mode, the AI agents themselves have their own in private or incognito mode. Even those chats needed to be preserved, and you never get notified about this lawsuit. And we're using the New York Times as an example, but there could be other lawsuits. Maybe that specific lawsuit, your chats don't get provided, but it sets the stage that the next lawsuit you might. And it just underscores that I think we all have to be very careful that this feels like a private relationship, but it's not. Which goes back to showing your ID. I think that when you let an agent work on your behalf, it's very important that the service provider knows what human is this. So, for example, when I authorize the agent to buy a plane ticket on my account, I would fully expect that once digital IDs are a thing, right? We're at 7% deployment right now. The expectation is that by the end of next year, it'll be 30%. And by the end of 2027, it'll be 50%. And so there's going to be a tipping point somewhere in the next 18 to 24 months where more people have a digital ID than don't. And right now, most people who have a digital ID think, what do I do with this thing? I see in the airport that you accept it, but that's kind of strange. And I might have heard about somebody who got pulled over and showed it on their phone. That just feels like a novelty. Like you said, leave my ID at home. And that's certainly one of the values. But the real value comes when we start building applications that assume that I can prove to you for sure who I am right now in this browser session just by putting my thumb on my phone. It's as easy as that. And you have no doubt about who I am. There's a funny thing about retail right now. Vouch was founded by our founder, John Baird, worked in the digital jewelry business, selling jewelry online. And this is how this idea came to him, where even when you ask someone for their ID online to ship them jewelry, you still aren't positive if the person is who they say they are. They could have an absolutely perfect fake ID. So it's still risk-based. Everything we do today to identify people online is risk-based. And we try to be as great as we can at it. But at the end of the day, you're still getting a risk score. Whereas with digital ID, you're now getting an absolute certainty. If during that jewelry order, you said to the person, I need to see your ID, please, and you see the digital ID, there's no way the person can modify what the state has said your ID is. There's no way you can use it without your biometric. So we have absolute proof that the person is who they say they are. And this is going to profoundly change how we all work together online. Every website that has a login button is going to rethink how they identify their users. Now, there may be some sites that just don't care. Don't care if my user is a person. I don't care if my user is a bot. I really don't care. But most sites will. SaaS sites, any e-tailer will care. Anybody, social media sites will all care. It'll be possible to absolutely identify who the person is and use that every time we either give them access to an account, either for the first time or changing a password, or when you give their agent access to an account, we want to make sure that this absolutely is a human who we think it is, granting access to this agent, because once the agent has access, it can do a lot of stuff.
Absolutely. Love it, Peter. I think this one could be one where we talk deeper into scenarios and stories for a long time, but we gotta actually let you get back to it. I do appreciate the time, and I'm sure people would like to learn more and get some more understanding of digital IDs, and maybe they have a follow-up question. What are good ways to get in touch?
Yeah, I'd love to hear from you. My email is first name, period, last name @vouched.id. So Peter, period, Horadan, Horadan @vouched.id. I'd love to hear from you. I love talking about this.
Absolutely. Thank you for the time, Peter. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for this episode. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, talked about digital IDs. We talked about, a lot of the mobile driver's licenses will now be a lot more accessible. We talked about the impact of digital IDs and sharing your driver's license, what the difference is. We also talked about where digital IDs and authentication fit within the agentic world, privacy, security. We covered a whole bunch. I mean, Peter gave us tons of examples and stories. So please share this episode with somebody else who might benefit from learning about this. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.